There is something profoundly peculiar happening inside you right now, and you have been so busy running from it, so occupied with the noise of schedules and notifications and the endless chatter of what other people think of you, that you have never once stopped long enough to notice it. The mind, that extraordinary, mysterious instrument sitting behind your eyes, has been quietly, patiently, and without your permission, writing the entire script of your life. Every fear you have ever surrendered to, every ceiling you have accepted above your ambition, every relationship you have sabotaged or settled for, every morning you woke up and felt that hollow, unnamed dread before the day even began, none of that was an accident. None of that was fate. All of it was the result of a mind left ungoverned, a mind that was never taught that it is a tool to be mastered and not a master to be obeyed. You see, the ancient teachers, the sages sitting beneath their trees, the philosophers who wandered barefoot through the questions of existence, they all arrived at one singular, thunderous conclusion that modern civilization has buried under convenience and distraction. The conclusion was this: the greatest frontier of human conquest is not the ocean, not outer space, not the mountain, not the marketplace. It is the 6 inches of territory between your ears. And until a man or woman learns to plant their flag in that territory, to govern it with intention and wisdom and a certain fearless awareness, they will spend their entire lives being governed by it instead. If you have ever felt like you are living someone else's life, repeating patterns you never chose, feeling emotions that seem to have a will of their own, then this conversation today is not a coincidence. It is an appointment. If what you are hearing is landing somewhere deep in you, I want you to do something right now. Hit that like button, because this is the kind of truth that deserves to travel further than just to you. Subscribe to this channel so that we can keep having these conversations together, conversations that actually go somewhere worth going. And drop a comment below. I genuinely want to know, where in the world are you watching from? Because this message was meant to find you wherever you are. There is a conversation that has been going on inside the human species for thousands of years, and it is the most important conversation we have ever had, and yet it is the one most of us have never been formally introduced to. It begins with a question so simple that it almost seems insulting to ask it, and yet the asking of it has the power to rearrange everything about the way you experience your existence. The question is this: who is thinking your thoughts? Not what are you thinking, not how are you thinking, but who is the one sitting behind the stream of words and images and emotions and judgments that flows through your awareness from the moment you wake until the moment you finally surrender to sleep. Because if you have never asked that question, if you have simply assumed without examination that you and your mind are the same thing, then you have made the most costly assumption a human being can make, and you have been paying for it every single day of your life without knowing the bill was being charged to you. The great confusion of the modern age is not ignorance of technology or science or political philosophy. The great confusion is that humanity has mastered the manipulation of the external world while remaining almost entirely illiterate about the internal one. We have learned to split the atom, and we cannot stop a single anxious thought spiral from ruining an entire Tuesday. We have built systems that can send a voice from one side of the planet to the other in less than a second, and yet we cannot communicate clearly with ourselves, cannot understand why we keep choosing the same painful patterns, cannot seem to locate the source of the quiet suffering that follows us from city to city, from relationship to relationship, from achievement to achievement. The problem is not the world. The problem has never been the world. The problem is that no one taught us the difference between being the mind and having a mind. When you look at the ocean, you do not confuse yourself with the wave. You stand on the shore and you watch the wave rise and curl and crash, and you know instinctively, naturally, that you are the one watching and not the wave itself. But when a thought rises in your consciousness, when a wave of anxiety or anger or longing or shame curls up inside your awareness, you crash with it. You become it. You say, I am anxious, rather than there is anxiety moving through me. You say, I am angry, rather than anger is visiting me right now. This linguistic collapse, this merging of the observer with the observed, is the root of almost every psychological prison a human being can construct around themselves. Because once you believe that you are the thought, you have no choice but to defend it, obey it, be carried away by it, and ultimately be defined by it. The philosophers of the East, and I want to speak plainly about this because this is not merely philosophy. This is practical mechanics of living. The teachers of the contemplative traditions arrived at something they called the witness consciousness, not as a mystical achievement available only to monks who have renounced the world and sit in mountain caves, but as the birthright of every single human being who has ever drawn breath. The witness is that part of you that can watch your own thoughts the way you watch clouds. The witness is the awareness behind the awareness, the presence that notices when you are being swallowed whole by a narrative your mind is generating about your life. And here is what is staggering. What is genuinely staggering, if you let yourself feel the full weight of it, that witness has always been there. It has never left. It was present when you were 6 years old and you scraped your knee and cried. It was present when you were 17 and your heart broke for the first time. It was present during your greatest humiliation and your most private joy. It has been watching quietly, patiently, without judgment through every experience of your entire life, and you have never properly met it. Now the mind, bless it, is extraordinary. It is arguably the most sophisticated instrument in the known universe. It can solve equations and compose symphonies and construct ethical frameworks and imagine futures that do not yet exist. But it was designed to be operated, and like any powerful instrument, when it is left to run without a skilled operator at the helm, it defaults to its most primitive programs. And the most primitive program of the human mind is the survival algorithm, the ancient, relentless, anxious scanning of the environment for threat, danger, loss, rejection, inadequacy. This algorithm was incredibly useful when we lived in a world where physical threats were everywhere, where the rustle in the grass might be a predator, where social rejection from the tribe meant literal death. But we do not live in that world anymore. We live in a world of relative safety. And yet the algorithm has not received the update. It is still running. It is scanning your emails for threats. It is reading tone into text messages that have no tone. It is rehearsing arguments with people who have not said anything yet. It is catastrophizing about futures that have never happened and statistically will never happen. And because you were never taught that you are not this algorithm, you have been faithfully executing its commands your entire life, mistaking its fear for wisdom, mistaking its anxiety for intuition, mistaking its loops and repetitions for reality. The mind that is not governed does not simply leave you alone. This is the critical thing to understand. A mind left ungoverned does not sit quietly in the corner waiting for you to decide what to do with it. It takes over. It becomes the author of your life, writing scenes you would never consciously choose, casting characters you never auditioned, and worst of all, convincing you the whole time that you are the one holding the pen. It tells you that you are not enough, and because you have identified yourself with the mind, you believe it without question. It tells you that things will never change, and you build your decisions around that belief. It tells you that love is dangerous, that success is for other kinds of people, that your particular configuration of wounds and history and circumstance makes you exempt from transformation. And you nod, and you adjust your ambitions downward, and you call it being realistic. But here is what the mind is doing when it tells you these things. It is not giving you truth. It is giving you pattern recognition based on your most emotionally significant past experiences, filtered through the lens of your earliest wounds, wrapped in the language of certainty. The mind does not distinguish between what happened and what is happening. It does not have a calendar. A child who was consistently criticized in their formative years carries a mind that will interpret neutral feedback as criticism decades later, in boardrooms and bedrooms and everywhere in between, because the mind is running a pattern laid down in a time before it had the sophistication to evaluate it objectively. This is not weakness. This is not a character flaw. This is the mechanical operation of an unexamined instrument. And the solution is not to fight the mind, not to wrestle it into submission, not to hate it for the chaos it has created. The solution is to understand it, to observe it with the same patient curiosity a skilled mechanic brings to a complicated engine, and through that understanding, to reclaim your position as the operator rather than the operated. When Myles Munroe stood before audiences and told them that the wealthiest place on earth was the cemetery, he was not speaking romantically. He was speaking with the precision of a man who had looked directly at the human tragedy of potential unrealized, of gifts buried, because the mind was never brought under the governance of purpose. The mind untrained is the thief of your destiny. It will convince you to play small in a universe that built you for magnitude. It will run arguments for your limitations with more passion and creativity than you have ever run arguments for your possibilities. It will find evidence for your inadequacy with the diligence of a research scholar. And it will do all of this not because it is evil, not because it is your enemy, but simply because it was never given proper instruction, never shown who is actually in charge, never introduced to the operator who lives in the stillness behind all of its noise. The invitation today, and I use that word intentionally because no one can force this on you. This must be chosen. The invitation is to begin the most important relationship of your life. Not a relationship with another person, not a relationship with success or achievement or spiritual practice, though all of those have their place and their glory. The most important relationship of your life is the relationship between you and your own mind. Because every other relationship you will ever have is being filtered through that one. The way you see your partner, your children, your work, your God, your future. All of it passes through the lens of your mental habits, your unconscious beliefs, your unexamined assumptions about what is possible and what is deserved and what is safe. Clean that lens and everything changes. Leave it murky, and no external rearrangement of your circumstances will ever give you the life your soul is actually reaching for. The mind is not you. Say that to yourself with the quiet authority of someone who has just been handed an extraordinary piece of liberating information. The mind is not you. It is yours. There is an enormous difference between those two statements, and that difference is the entire distance between a life lived in reaction and a life lived in creation. The mind is a magnificent, powerful, endlessly creative instrument that was given to you at birth as the primary mechanism through which you were meant to design your existence. But you were meant to be the designer. You were meant to hold the instrument in your hands, to learn its workings, to play it with skill and intentionality, to be astonished by what it can produce when guided by a clear, calm, purposeful awareness. You were not meant to be played by it. You were not meant to wake up every morning and immediately hand over the controls to a collection of unexamined belief and emotional programs that you absorbed before you had the consciousness to evaluate them. That is not living. That is haunting your own life. The thought before the thought, understanding the root system of your mental patterns. There is a conversation that has been happening in the background of your life, beneath the noise of what you say out loud, beneath the decisions you make at the surface, beneath the version of yourself that you show to the world. And this conversation is the most powerful conversation you will ever have access to, because it is the one from which everything else in your experience is generated. It is the conversation of your deep thought patterns, the ones that run automatically, the ones you did not consciously choose and have never consciously examined, the ones that were written into you before you had the language to ask whether they were true. This is what I want to talk about now, not the thoughts you are aware of, not the deliberate thinking you do when you sit down to solve a problem, but the thought before the thought, the root system that lives underground while the branches and leaves of your conscious mind catch all the sunlight, all the attention. Every human being you have ever met, every human being who has ever lived, operates from a set of core beliefs about the nature of reality, about who they are within that reality, and about what they deserve and are capable of receiving from it. These beliefs are not conclusions reached through careful, rational deliberation. They are conclusions reached through experience, through the accumulation of impressions laid down in childhood and early life, through the emotional experiences that left the deepest marks, through the messages received from parents and teachers and culture and religion and every relationship that shaped the first chapters of your story. And here is the crucial thing, the thing that changes everything once you really understand it. These beliefs, once formed, become the interpretive filter through which every subsequent experience is processed. They do not just passively record reality, they actively construct it. Consider this with me for a moment. Two people walk into the same room, the same situation, the same set of circumstances. One person leaves feeling energized, valued, full of possibility. The other person leaves feeling inadequate, threatened, invisible. The room did not change. The circumstances did not change. What changed was the interpretive filter running beneath the level of conscious thought, the deep belief about self-worth, about safety, about whether the world is fundamentally a welcoming or a hostile place. This is not metaphor. This is the literal architecture of subjective experience. Your deep thought patterns are not describing the world to you. They are creating your experience of it. Now, the reason this matters with such urgency, the reason we must look at this without flinching, is that most people spend their entire lives trying to change the circumstances of their existence without ever touching the root system that is generating those circumstances. They change jobs, change partners, change cities, change hairstyles, change political affiliations, and they carry the same inner world with them into every new arrangement of the outer one. And they are bewildered, genuinely, painfully bewildered, because they worked so hard, they made such significant changes, they left so much behind, and somehow they ended up in the same place, wearing different clothes, with different people standing beside them, feeling exactly the same way they always felt. This is not bad luck. This is not cosmic injustice. This is the root system of the mind reasserting its dominance over the landscape of your life. The ancient Chinese teacher spoke of the invisible line that connects the inner to the outer. The concept that the world we encounter is always a reflection of the world we carry within us. This is not a comfortable idea for many people because it removes the comfort of blame. If your outer world is a reflection of your inner world, then you cannot give the full responsibility for your experience to your parents, to the economy, to the culture, to the people who hurt you, to the circumstances you were born into. This is not to say those things do not matter. They matter enormously, and it would be dishonest and cruel to pretend otherwise. But they are not the final word. They were the inputs. What you do with those inputs, how you interpret them, what meaning you assign to them, what beliefs you allow them to write into your operating system, that is where your authorship lies, and that is where it can be reclaimed. The thought before the thought is typically not a full sentence. It is more like a tone, a felt sense, a pre-verbal knowing that has been translated so many times through repetition that it now feels like bedrock reality rather than interpretation. For a person who grew up in an environment of instability, the thought before the thought might be a constant, background hum of things will fall apart, that flavors every plan, every investment of emotion, every moment of happiness with a subtle waiting for the loss that must surely be coming. They do not sit down every morning and consciously think, things will fall apart today. The thought has become invisible through repetition. It operates below the threshold of awareness, quietly shaping decisions, quietly limiting investment, quietly building the exact outcome it expects, and then pointing to that outcome as proof that it was right all along. This is what the psychologists call a self-fulfilling prophecy, but I think that term undersells the profundity of what is actually happening. It is not merely a prediction that influences behavior. It is a creative act. The deep mind is always, at every moment, collaborating with reality to produce the experiences that confirm its most fundamental beliefs. And it does this not with malice, not with any intention to harm you, but with the simple mechanical reliability of a system doing exactly what it was designed to do. The mind seeks coherence. It seeks confirmation of its existing model of reality because a consistent model, even a painful one, is less threatening to the organism than uncertainty. The mind would rather be consistently wrong about its limitations than live in the open, uncertain, unmapped territory of a new belief that has not yet been tested. Understanding this is like being handed a torch in a cave you have been navigating in the dark for decades. Suddenly you can see the walls you have been bumping into. Suddenly the obstacles that felt random and inexplicable reveal themselves as the precise and predictable output of specific mental programs you did not know were running. And this seeing, this illumination of the root system is itself the beginning of freedom, not because seeing automatically changes the patterns. It does not. That takes practice and time and a particular kind of patient self-compassion, but because you cannot change what you cannot see. Every transformation begins with an honest, unflinching act of witnessing. Every liberation begins with the courage to look at the cage and name it accurately. The work of examining the thought before the thought is not the dramatic, turbulent, emotionally violent work that many people fear it to be. It is in the hands of a wise practitioner, more like gardening than like surgery. It is the quiet, consistent, patient work of noticing when a reaction seems disproportionate to its trigger, noticing when a familiar sensation of fear or smallness or unworthiness arises in a situation where the evidence does not logically support it, noticing when you hear yourself using words like always and never and I can't and that's just how I am, because those words are almost always the surface expression of a deep belief that has never been examined in the light of your current capabilities and your current understanding. The man who believes he is fundamentally unlovable will construct an entire behavioral architecture around that belief. He will push people away before they can leave. He will choose partners who confirm his unworthiness. He will interpret kindness with suspicion and distance with relief. And he will call the resulting loneliness evidence of his original belief rather than evidence of the pattern. The woman who believes that success is followed by punishment or loss will unconsciously self-sabotage at the threshold of every major achievement, will find reasons to pull back when things are going well, will create crisis to interrupt momentum, and will attribute the stalling to external circumstances rather than to the deep program that has been protecting her from what it believes is the inevitable cost of winning. These are not rare extreme cases. These are patterns playing out in millions of lives right now, including in the life of everyone listening to this conversation, in different configurations and with different intensities, but running nonetheless. The invitation is to become a student of your own root system, to sit with yourself in genuine inquiry, not in judgment, not in self-attack, not with the harsh and impatient demand for immediate transformation, but with the kind of curious, gentle attention you would give to a garden you have just inherited, acknowledging what is growing there, understanding what conditions caused it to grow, asking honestly what you want to cultivate and what you want to release, and beginning the slow, deliberate, enormously rewarding work of tending. Because the root system can change This is not theory. This is not optimistic philosophy. The neuroplasticity research of the last several decades has confirmed in the language of biology what the sages have been teaching in the language of wisdom for millennia. The brain is not a fixed structure. The mind is not a completed monument. The patterns are not permanent. And the beliefs you hold today about who you are and what you are capable of are not the final edition of the story. They are a draft, and you are the writer. Stillness is not emptiness. It is the training ground of a governed mind. There is a word that has been terribly misunderstood by a culture that runs on stimulation, a culture that has come to associate productivity with noise and depth with activity and significance with business. That word is stillness. And the misunderstanding has cost us more than we can calculate. Because stillness is not the absence of something, it is the presence of everything essential. It is the condition in which the most important work a human being can do actually gets done. It is the training ground of the governed mind, the laboratory of self-knowledge, the quiet room where you finally get to meet yourself without the performance, without the persona, without the relentless motion that has been keeping the real questions at bay. We live in a civilization that is deeply, almost pathologically afraid of quiet. Watch what happens when a silence falls in a social gathering. The discomfort is immediate and almost universal, and someone will rush to fill it within seconds, as if silence itself were a kind of emergency. Watch what a person does in the first moment of waking before the phone reaches for them. There is a window, brief and fragile, where the mind is still settling, still quiet, still close to the undisturbed awareness that sleep provides, and most people snap that window shut immediately, flooding themselves with information and stimulation before they have had even a single conscious breath. This is not an innocent habit. This is a flight from self, a continuous running from the interior landscape, because at some point the interior landscape became associated with discomfort, with the unanswered questions, with the unprocessed pain, with all the things that keep trying to surface when the noise stops. But here is the paradox, the beautiful and slightly uncomfortable paradox that stillness always presents. It is precisely because the interior landscape holds discomfort that it also holds treasure. The same depth that frightens you is the depth that contains your most original thinking, your clearest intuitions, your most honest self-knowledge, your access to the kind of wisdom that cannot be found in any book or lecture or mentor's advice, because it is the wisdom native to your specific configuration of experience and consciousness. You cannot have one without the other. You cannot cherry-pick the pleasant parts of your inner life while permanently avoiding the difficult ones. The lake is one body of water. The stillness that brings you peace is the same stillness that will eventually bring you face to face with the things you have been running from. And this is not a curse. This is the design. This is the intelligence of the system working exactly as it was meant to work. The Eastern traditions, and I want to keep returning to this well because it holds water that the Western world is desperately thirsty for, have understood for thousands of years that the untrained mind is like the surface of a lake in a windstorm. It is constantly agitated, constantly reactive to every passing breeze, every stone thrown into it by circumstance or by other people. And in this state of constant agitation, you cannot see the bottom of the lake. You cannot see clearly. You cannot access the deep resources of your own consciousness. The fish that live in the deep water, the insights, the creative solutions, the genuine intuitions, the authentic desires, they are all there. They have always been there, but the surface is too disturbed for you to see them. Meditation, contemplative prayer, stillness in whatever form resonates with your tradition and your temperament. These are not luxuries. They are not spiritual extras for people who have already solved the practical problems of life. They are the fundamental technology of mind governance, the practice through which the surface of the lake gradually, incrementally begins to settle. Now I want to be careful here because the word meditation carries so much baggage in the popular imagination. Images of crossed legs and incense and impossible mental silence that many people have dismissed it before they have genuinely tried it. What I am pointing to is simpler and more accessible than any technique, though techniques can be helpful. What I am pointing to is simply the practice of sitting with yourself without immediately reaching for distraction. 5 minutes in the morning before the phone. 10 minutes of walking without listening to anything. A meal eaten in actual silence rather than in the company of a screen. The practice of noticing what arises when the stimulation is removed, not trying to stop it, not judging it, not fixing it, simply noticing it with the same quality of attention you might give to weather passing through a window. This is the beginning of stillness practice. This is the entry point into the laboratory where mind governance is developed. What happens in that stillness? What begins to emerge when you stop running? Initially, it is often uncomfortable. The thoughts that have been kept at bay by business arrive in a rush. The feelings you have been too occupied to feel start to make themselves known. The questions you have been avoiding with activity suddenly fill the room. This is normal. This is actually a sign that the process is working, that the mind is beginning to process what it has been holding in suspension. And the critical skill at this moment, the skill that makes the difference between a stillness practice that heals and a stillness practice that is abandoned because it felt too difficult, is the skill of non-judgmental observation. You do not need to solve the thoughts that arise. You do not need to fix the feelings that surface. You need only to observe them with the knowledge that you are the observer and not the thing being observed. They are the wave. You are the shore. Over time, and I mean real time, not the 3 sessions you give to a new habit before declaring it doesn't work, but genuine committed time measured in weeks and months. Over that kind of time, a remarkable thing begins to happen. The gap between stimulus and response begins to widen. You find yourself in a situation that would previously have triggered an immediate, automatic, uncontrolled reaction, and for a fraction of a second, you notice that you are about to react. You notice the familiar pattern rising. And in that noticing, in that tiny sliver of awareness between the stimulus and the habitual response, you find something unprecedented. You find choice. And choice, real choice, the kind rooted in awareness rather than in mere impulse switching, is the foundation of a governed life. It is the difference between being a person to whom life happens and being a person who consciously participates in the happening. The governed mind does not mean the silent mind, and this is important to understand. Governance does not mean that the mind stops generating thoughts, stops feeling emotions, stops responding to the world with all its richness and complexity. A governed river does not stop flowing. It is channeled, directed, given banks that allow its power to be applied purposefully rather than dissipated in all directions. The governed mind still thinks abundantly, still feels deeply, still engages fully with the texture and weight and beauty of human experience. But it does so from a position of authorship rather than reactivity. It brings to each thought the question of whether this thought serves the life you are building. It brings to each emotional response the awareness that distinguishes between the emotion as information and the emotion as identity. It brings to each decision the spaciousness of a mind that has been trained in stillness and therefore is not in a constant state of scarcity-driven emergency. The training ground of stillness is where you learn slowly and practically that you are not the storm. You are the sky. The storm is temporary, always moving, always passing through, and you have been so identified with the storm, so convinced that you are made of its weather, that you forgot the sky. But the sky has never moved. The sky has held every storm that has ever visited your life, held it completely without being damaged by it, without being diminished by it, without being reduced by it. This is your nature, not the storm, the sky. And the practice of stillness is the practice of remembering this again and again, as many times as it takes, until the memory becomes so stable and so clear that even in the middle of the fiercest weather, you do not lose contact with the sky that you are.